So this morning I awoke to a comment on one of my videos asking if Scarlet Monastery Cathedral was a good gold farm or not. So I decided to bring out this video for you all on why I think Scarlet Monastery is an excellent gold farm in Classic WoW, particularly Scarlet Monastery Cathedral, and why it's grossly underrated. So let's just dive straight in. Now, one of my favourite reasons for doing this farm is the low barrier to entry. Now, Scarlet Monastery is a dungeon that many of you will have ran while levelling, and probably made a bit of gold there even if you didn't realise while you were doing your levelling process. And the barrier for entry for this dungeon is very minimal. If you're going to be doing Cathedral, it pretty much boils down to getting the key, which means you will have had to complete at least one run of library and loot the key from the chest at the end, which you probably did while you were levelling, and if not, if you're able to do this farm, running the library once is not going to be particularly difficult for you. After that, there really isn't much of a barrier to entry apart from the fact that you need to be able to kill the mobs. Now, in principle, you can do this farm. I've actually seen it done on level appropriate characters soloing these mobs in the dungeon, and the bigger and stronger you get, the easier the farm becomes, which again is another big perk that I like for doing this farm, because it is essentially rewarding you for putting in the time and effort on your character to improve its soloing capabilities, so you can get a better gold return faster by running this dungeon. Now, just to give some frame of perspective on how difficult this is, I am a very poorly geared level 60 Fury Warrior in this video, and I am performing the run relatively easily. It does take a bit of time compared to other classes because I don't have much in the way of AoE. I'm pretty much going mob to mob. If you are on a class that can do this quite easily, so something like a mage or a hunter, you're going to have a lot quicker time than I am. But it is open to pretty much anyone. If I can do this on this gear on a warrior, then chances are you'll be able to do it just fine too with whatever you've got available to you. Now, the next thing to talk about is going to be the fact that the mobs in this dungeon are also my preferred kind of mobs for gold farms, in the fact that they are humanoid. Now, in this dungeon, every single mob that you are going to kill in Cathedral is going to be a humanoid. Now, why is that so good? It's great because of the fact that humanoids drop cloth, and the cloth in here is plentiful to say the least. In the run that you're watching me do now, I leave with about 140 to 150 silk cloth, which admittedly is a relatively low value cloth, but in that quantity you have so many options with regards to how you go about making your money from this cloth. You can sell it on the auction house. For me, a stack is about 45 silver. I imagine it's roughly similar to what you're all going to be seeing as well if you're playing in EU. And when you're coming away with 5 or 6 stacks or more, that is a pretty sizable chunk to the gold returns that you're going to be making from this dungeon. Now, it isn't to say that that's where all the gold is coming from. You're going to make an awful lot of gold also in simply the currency that drops from these mobs directly. Now, that's again another benefit to the humanoids. They all drop a amount of silver in this dungeon. Anywhere in my experience between about 4 to about 20 silver from any given mob. Now, that is fantastic because not only is it obviously great for gold returns, but it doesn't have any sort of middleman. There isn't having to sell to vendors, which takes up bag space. There isn't really any need to sell anything on the auction house. You're just getting gold directly put into your bag, which is something that I really like. For the amount of time the dungeon takes to run, the amount of gold that you make this way is actually quite phenomenal. In this run that I did here for you all, I made just over 5 gold just in the raw gold directly into my bag. Now, I appreciate there are obviously gold farms that are going to have higher returns than this one, but this video is going to be telling you about why this is such an excellent gold farm. The absolute gold returns is not necessarily one of the best reasons, but the raw gold value there is noteworthy. It is certainly worth your time to go and give it a try. And then beyond that, we also have the rest of the items that are going to comprise your gold returns, be it in the form of green items, which are quite plentiful in here, grey items that are going to be going to the vendor for a decent amount of gold, and the blue items that drop both the bind on pickup from the bosses as well as quite a lot of bind on equip blues. You actually see me get one during this run, which is worth about 15 gold, and obviously on occasions when that happens, it is going to greatly increase your net returns from these runs. Now, this run, when I finish, I actually get returns of just over 5 gold from the items that from the currency I pick up direct from the mobs. And then from there we do also go and vendor the 2 items that we get from the boss, or the bosses if you see it that way, at the end of the dungeon. And as well as that, when we vendor all of the rest of the things that we got in this dungeon, which was mostly just a couple of greens, it was not the best run, we end up coming away with just under 12 gold that we've got directly from either the mob currency or from the vendor for the things that we have vendored, as well as also coming away with all the cloth that I mentioned, the blue item that I mentioned, and also a green recipe that I intend on giving to my tailor, or otherwise would be sold on the auction house for about another gold. So all in all, I would say that that run has netted me roughly in the range of about 30 gold, which is pretty fantastic. And when you bear in mind that even at my slow pace of running this dungeon, 30 gold took me about half an hour. So if I was to get lucky and keep at that sort of rate, which I admit this was a relatively high run thanks to the value of that blue, that is going to mean that you can get as much as 60 gold an hour from this farm while performing the farm on a relatively weak character, which is excellent. As for the blues that drop here, I did also neglect to mention that there is actually quite a large drop table of blues for this dungeon, as well as obviously the potential for world epics to drop. Now, we are in a level bracket where world epics do start to exist and you can get them in Scarlet Monastery. They are incredibly rare, obviously, like they are everywhere, but they are there, so they are a noteworthy factor, including being able to get the best in slot druid weapon for druid tanks pre-raid, which is obviously going to net you quite a profit were you lucky enough to get it. Now, as I alluded to, I am doing this farm in this video on a relatively weak class for the farm in the form of my warrior. Now, there are a few reasons for this, most noteworthy being the fact that my warrior is currently my only level 60, but be that as it may, I would still be performing this on the warrior, as one of my favourite aspects of this farm is how close it is to Undercity. Now, my warrior is currently trying to grind the reputation for Alterac Valley to pick up Lobotomizer and also get the Alterac Valley trinket leveled up so that I can use it for my soloing set for doing these dungeons. Now, with the average queue times that are currently being experienced for Alterac Valley of in and around 30 to 40 minutes, that gives me more than enough time to go to the Alterac Valley Battlemaster in Undercity, to queue up for the dungeon, proceed to run up to Scarlet Monastery, perform the entire dungeon, and then be roughly at about the point where I get ported into the dungeon. When I recorded the footage for this video, I was actually able, due to a relatively long queue time, to run out from the dungeon, run back to Brill and sell my items, to then get you these gold tallies that I've been quoting throughout the video, and then my queue popped just a minute or two later. So as far as something to do while you are in the queue for Alterac Valley, or anything else, like any other PvP battleground that's going to have a relatively long queue time, it is worth noting that this is an excellent option that you can engage in for something for that downtime, and it does actually come with an added benefit. That benefit is that unlike a lot of the times where you have to run out from dungeons and run all the way back to vendors like I did, if your queue pops around the time that you are ending the dungeon, then you can actually go directly into your battleground, perform it, and when you come out of the battleground, you will be back at the Battlemaster in Undercity, saving you the run. It's a small benefit, but it is there. It is also worth noting that one of the big benefits of this farm when you're doing that particular method is the fact that most of the value of this run does come in the form of the trash mobs and not the bosses, so if you only get like 2/3 of the way through your run when your queue pops, it's not tragic. You've not missed out entirely by the fact you haven't been able to kill the bosses. You will still get a decent amount of gold. Now, as for performing the dungeon itself, it is worth noting that there are a few little tips and tricks that I can give on being able to perform this farm. First of all, the things to notice are that the Myrmidons that you are fighting in this dungeon do enrage at low health and cause quite a lot of damage to occur when they do so, so you do want to have a strategy for that, be it some sort of damage mitigation or an ability to instantly kill the mob when it enrages. Most of the other mobs don't really have an enrage, but what they do have is at low health, because they are humanoid, they will fear and run themselves into another mob to gather support. If you are a class that is not struggling to perform this dungeon, this may actually be beneficial to you in essence, because you'll be able to get the mobs without having to pull them for yourself. If you are a class that's going to struggle, then do have a plan in place, be it a slow or a stun or some sort of execute, which is what I tend to use on my warrior. And finally, do not fight the last boss without killing all of the mobs inside of the cathedral building itself. You will die when the boss decides that it is going to bring all of those mobs to you, and that is not worth the potential time save. I have attempted it and used my cooldowns in order to attempt to cleave down all of the mobs. I was successful on 1 or 2 occasions when I was leaving myself with 3 or 4 mobs, but if you try and do it with the majority of the mobs still up, you will just die unless you have a godly plan, or of course are a frost mage, because those things are broken. But that's going to about do it for this video, guys. I do hope you enjoyed it. To surmise, I think that Scarlet Monastery Cathedral is an excellent gold farm due to decent returns, a low barrier to entry, and being incredibly convenient to access, which is something that I think is greatly underrated in gold farms, especially for people who are looking to do sort of an hour of gold farming at the most. This is an excellent choice for you. But yeah, that is going to do it for the video, guys. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, please do consider liking the video, and if you want to be kept up to date when I bring out my next video, then do consider subscribing to the channel. But for now, guys, see you later. Bye.